The massive space station hung in the darkness like a jewel made of metal and glass. Nexus Prime was bigger than most cities on Earth. It spun slowly in the empty space between 3 different alien territories. Ships from dozens of worlds docked at its many ports every day. Captain Jake Sullivan pressed his face to the small window of his transport ship. He had seen pictures of Nexus Prime before, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. The station was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Today, humans would meet the Galactic Council for the first time. Everything had to go perfectly. "First time seeing an alien space station, Captain?" asked Lieutenant Amy Carter. She was Jake's security chief and had been with him for 3 years. Amy was tough, smart, and always ready for trouble. "First time for all of us," Jake replied. He turned away from the window and looked at his small team. There were only 4 humans on this mission. Besides Amy, there was Dr. Lisa Park, who knew more about alien biology than anyone else on Earth. The 4th member was Sergeant Bill Hayes, a quiet man who seemed to know how to fix anything. Their transport ship was small compared to the alien vessels around them. Jake could see ships that looked like giant insects, others that seemed to be made of living coral, and some that were just balls of light with no solid parts at all. Humanity was definitely the new kids in this neighborhood. Docking. "In 5 minutes," called the pilot from the front of the ship. Jake straightened his uniform and checked his equipment one more time. Everything had to look professional. The future of Earth might depend on the next few hours. The docking process was smooth. Jake felt the soft bump as their ship connected to the station. A moment later, the airlock door opened with a soft hiss. Beyond it was a corridor that looked more like a museum than a hallway. The walls were covered with symbols and artwork from hundreds of different worlds. Jake stepped forward first, as was proper for the mission leader. The gravity felt normal, which was good. The air smelled clean but had a strange metallic taste. Everything was bigger than human scale, built for beings much larger than people. They walked down the corridor in single file. Other beings moved past them in both directions. Jake tried not to stare, but it was hard. There were creatures that looked like walking trees, others that floated instead of walking, and some that were clearly robots or artificial beings. A few looked almost human, but with different colored skin or extra arms. Most of the aliens ignored the humans completely. A few stopped to stare, but none seemed hostile. Jake began to relax slightly. Maybe this would go better than he had feared. The corridor opened into a vast central area. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it. Shops and restaurants lined the walls on multiple levels. Beings from dozens of worlds moved around, talking in languages that sounded like music, static, or sounds that had no human equivalent. "This way to security checkpoint," said a voice behind them. Jake turned to see a floating ball of light with a mechanical voice. It was the station's artificial intelligence, speaking through one of its mobile units. The security checkpoint was impossible to miss. It was a wall of scanners, guards, and barriers that stretched across the entire width of the central area. Behind the barriers, Jake could see the diplomatic quarter where the council meetings would take place. As they approached, Jake got his first close look at alien security. The guards were massive insect-like beings with hard shells and multiple arms. Their compound eyes reflected the light in rainbow patterns. These were Keltharians, according to the briefing files Jake had studied. "Papers and identification," said the largest guard. His voice came through a translation device that made it sound mechanical and cold. Jake handed over the diplomatic documents that had taken months to prepare. The guard looked at the papers for a long time. Then he looked at Jake and his team. Finally, he spoke again. "You are humans from the planet Earth?" "That's correct," Jake replied. "We're here for the diplomatic summit. I am Guard Commander Zektal. I must inform you of station regulations." The guard's mandibles clicked as he spoke. "No firearms allowed beyond this point. Galactic Law 847.3 states clearly that all projectile weapons, energy weapons, and explosive devices are strictly prohibited in neutral space." Jake nodded politely. This was expected. Every civilized space station had similar rules. But something about the way the guard spoke made Jake curious. There was something in his tone that suggested this was more than just routine procedure. "That's perfectly understandable," Jake said. "But just to ensure complete compliance with your laws, could you define firearm for me?" Lieutenant Carter shot Jake a quick look. She knew that tone. It was the same tone Jake used when he was about to find a loophole in military regulations. Dr. Park also looked nervous. Guard Commander Zektal's compound eyes shifted back and forth. He seemed surprised by the question. Jake waited patiently, while the alien consulted a small device attached to his armor. A firearm is defined as any device that propels a projectile using chemical combustion, electromagnetic acceleration, or directed energy discharge. The guard read from his device. Jake stroked his chin thoughtfully. "I see. And what about mechanical projectile systems? Spring-loaded devices? Compressed air weapons? What about thrown weapons?" The guard's mandibles clicked faster now. He was clearly confused by Jake's questions. Other guards began to gather around, listening to the conversation. Some of the aliens waiting in line behind the humans also started paying attention. "I must consult with my supervisor," Guard Commander Zektal said. He spoke quickly into his communication device in his own language. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested concern. A few minutes later, another alien approached. This one was different from the insect-like guards. It moved like a snake, but stood upright on a powerful tail. Its scales shifted color from blue to green as it moved. According to Jake's briefing, this was a Sestak. "I am Security Supervisor Velkan," the snake-like being said. "There is some confusion about weapon definitions." "No confusion at all," Jake replied with a smile. "I just want to make sure we follow your laws exactly. Could you clarify what qualifies as a prohibited weapon?" Supervisor Velkan consulted a larger device than the guard had used. His scales shifted to a more purple color as he read. "The law specifically covers gunpowder weapons, railguns, laser weapons, plasma weapons, and particle beam weapons," he said finally. "Excellent," Jake said. His smile grew wider, and Amy Carter recognized the look. It was the same expression Jake wore when he had just figured out how to win a game that everyone else thought was unwinnable. "We'll comply completely with your regulations," Jake continued. "Thank you for the clarification." The security check continued normally after that. The aliens scanned the humans and their equipment, but found nothing that matched their definition of prohibited weapons. Jake's team was cleared to enter the diplomatic quarter. As they walked away from the checkpoint, Dr. Park whispered, "Captain, what was that all about?" Jake's smile became even wider. "Just making sure I understand the rules, Lisa. You know how important it is to follow the rules." Behind them, Guard Commander Zektal watched the humans disappear into the diplomatic quarter. Something about the human leader's questions bothered him, but he couldn't figure out what. He made a note to keep a close eye on the Earth delegation during their stay. The diplomatic quarter of Nexus Prime was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The corridors were wide enough for 6 humans to walk side by side, with ceilings that curved up into arches decorated with symbols from every known species in the galaxy. Soft light came from panels in the walls, changing color slowly from blue to green to purple. Their assigned quarters were surprisingly comfortable. The furniture could adjust to fit different body types, and the computer system could translate any language in real time. Jake's room had a large window that looked out into space, showing the slow rotation of distant stars. "Sir, we need to talk," Lieutenant Carter said as soon as the door closed behind them. The rest of the team gathered in Jake's main room. Dr. Park looked worried while Sergeant Hayes just waited quietly for orders. "What's on your mind, Amy?" Jake asked, though he already knew what she was going to say. "Captain, we're walking into a potentially hostile situation completely unarmed. Our intelligence reports suggest that at least 3 council members view humanity as a direct threat to their power." Amy's voice was calm but firm. "The Keltharians have a military culture that respects only strength. The Zephyrians control most of the galaxy's trade routes and see us as competition. And the Vorthan Empire has made it clear they think humans are too aggressive for civilized space." Dr. Park nodded in agreement. The biological data supports Amy's concerns. Several of these species have natural weapons that our security screening would have missed. Keltharian claws can cut through steel. Zephyrian crystal formations can generate electrical discharges. And the Vorthans have poison glands. Jake walked over to his personal equipment case and placed his thumb on the security scanner. The case opened with a soft click, revealing an interior that made his team stare in surprise. "Who said anything about being unarmed?" Jake asked with a grin. The case contained what looked like a collection of museum pieces. There was a compound bow made of carbon fiber and advanced polymers. Several crossbow pistols lay nestled in foam. Padding. Throwing knives with perfectly balanced blades were arranged in neat rows. A sling made of synthetic materials sat next to what appeared to be a disassembled medieval crossbow. "Sir," Amy said slowly, "are you planning to start a medieval war in space?" Jake lifted out the compound bow and tested its string tension. The weapon was a work of art, built by the finest craftsmen on Earth using materials that didn't exist. In medieval times, the arrows were carbon fiber with ceramic tips that could punch through most known armor. "Not start a war," Jake replied, checking the bow's cam system. "But if someone else starts one, I intend to finish it with superior human creativity." He continued unpacking his case. There were more surprises inside. A set of throwing stars that looked like they belonged in a museum but were made from advanced alloys. A pair of fighting sticks that could be connected to form a staff. Even what appeared to be an old-fashioned sling, though this one was made from materials that could survive re-entry into a planet's atmosphere. Sergeant Hayes examined one of the crossbow pistols with professional interest. "These aren't antiques, are they, sir?" "Not even close," Jake replied. "Every piece was custom-made by the best weaponsmiths on Earth. We might not be allowed to bring firearms, but nobody said anything about bringing the weapons that humans used for thousands of years before gunpowder was invented." Dr. Park picked up one of the throwing knives and tested its balance. "Captain, I have to ask, do you actually know how to use these?" Jake's grin became wider. "Lisa, before I joined the military, I spent 10 years competing in historical combat, sports. I can put an arrow through a playing card at 50 meters. I've won 3 world championships in knife throwing, and I once took second place in a medieval weapon tournament using nothing but a quarterstaff." Amy Carter shook her head, but she was smiling now. "Sir, you never mentioned any of this in your service record." The military doesn't usually care about ancient weapon skills, Jake replied. But I never stopped practicing. I figured it was good exercise and stress relief. I never imagined it might be useful for diplomacy. He picked up the compound bow again and demonstrated the draw. His form was perfect, the result of years of practice. When he drew the string back, the bow's pulley system made it easy to hold, at full draw, despite the high poundage. The beautiful thing about these weapons, Jake explained, is that they don't fit anyone's definition of modern military equipment. To most alien species, this stuff looks primitive, harmless. They see bows and arrows as museum pieces, not weapons of war. Sergeant Hayes was examining the crossbow parts. But they're not harmless, are they? Not even a little bit, Jake confirmed. This bow has a draw weight of 80 pounds and can send an arrow at over 300 feet per second. The crossbow, pistols are even more powerful in close quarters, and all of them are completely silent. Dr. Park set down the knife she had been examining. Captain, I understand the logic, but do you really think we'll need these? This is supposed to be a diplomatic mission. Jake's expression became more serious. Lisa, I hope we never touch these weapons while we're here, but human history is full of diplomatic missions that turn deadly. And our intelligence reports suggest that not everyone on this station wants these talks to succeed. He gestured toward the window, where they could see alien ships moving past the station. Look out there. We're surrounded by species that have been part of galactic civilization for thousands of years. Some of them have technology that makes our best weapons look like toys, but they've never faced humans before. Amy nodded slowly. They don't know how we think, how we adapt, how we find solutions that nobody else would consider. Exactly, Jake said. Every species out there follows the same patterns, the same rules, the same way of thinking about problems. But humans, we've always been different. When someone tells us something is impossible, we find a way to do it anyway. He closed the equipment case but didn't lock it. We're going to follow their rules exactly. Every law, every regulation, every custom. But we're going to do it in a way that keeps us alive and gets Earth into the Galactic Council. The team spent the rest of the evening reviewing their diplomatic strategy and studying the latest intelligence reports about the various council members. Jake made sure each team member understood the weapons and knew how to use them if necessary. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, but he had learned long ago that hope was not a strategy. As night fell on the station, Jake stood at his window looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, depending on him to bring humanity into the galactic community. He touched the bow case one more time and smiled. Tomorrow, the real negotiations would begin, and if anyone tried to stop them, they would learn that humans had been fighting wars and solving problems long before anyone invented energy weapons or faster-than-light travel. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. The first day of diplomatic talks went better than Jake had expected. The council chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in a circle that could hold representatives from 50 different worlds. The air was filled with the sound of translation, devices working in dozens of languages at once. Jake sat at the small table marked Earth and tried not to feel overwhelmed. Around him were beings that looked like they had stepped out of science fiction movies. The Keltharian delegation sat in tall chairs that accommodated their insect-like bodies. The Zephyrians looked like living crystals that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. The Vorthons were tall and thin, with skin that changed color based on their emotions. The chair recognizes the representative from Earth, announced the council moderator, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish, with tentacles that moved in complex patterns. Jake stood and activated his translation device. Honored members of the Galactic Council, I am Captain Jake Sullivan, speaking for the United Earth Federation. We come before you today to request membership in your organization and to offer our friendship to all peaceful species. He had practiced this speech dozens of times, but saying it here, surrounded by alien representatives, felt surreal. Jake continued his presentation, explaining Earth's history, culture, and technology. He talked about human achievements in science, art, and exploration. He carefully avoided mentioning humanity's long history of warfare. The questions from the council members were polite but pointed. The Zephyrian trade representative wanted to know about Earth's economic systems. The Vorthon diplomat asked about human social structures. Several species inquired about human technology and whether it posed any threat to galactic peace. Jake answered each question carefully, following the diplomatic guidelines his team had prepared. He emphasized humanity's desire for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. He spoke about Earth's resources and what humans could contribute to galactic civilization. But throughout the session, Jake noticed the Keltharian military delegation, watching him with what looked like hostility. Their leader, General Kextar, asked aggressive questions about human military capabilities and territorial ambitions. His tone suggested he had already decided that humans were a threat. When the session ended, Jake felt cautiously optimistic. Most of the council members seemed genuinely interested in establishing relations with Earth. But the Keltharian opposition was obvious and concerning. "How do you think it went?" Dr. Park asked as they walked back to their quarters. "Better than expected," Jake replied. "But I don't like the way the Keltharians are looking at us. Keep your eyes open." The second day of talks focused on specific areas of cooperation. Jake presented proposals for trade agreements, scientific exchanges, and cultural programs. The response was mostly positive. Several species expressed interest in human music and art. Others wanted to learn about Earth's agricultural techniques. But again, the Keltharian delegation remained hostile. General Kextar made it clear that he viewed humans as warlike and dangerous. He cited Earth's history of conflicts and questioned whether humans could be trusted in galactic affairs. "Your species has a documented history of violence spanning thousands of years," General Kextar said during one heated exchange. "What assurance can you give that humans will not bring this violence to galactic space?" Jake kept his voice calm and diplomatic. "General, every species has a history of conflict. The question is not whether we have fought wars in the past, but whether we can work together for peace in the future. Humanity has learned from its mistakes and chosen the path of cooperation." The general's mandibles clicked in what Jake recognized as disagreement, but he said nothing more. The session continued, but Jake could feel the tension in the room. On the third day, Jake presented humanity's final proposals. The council would vote tomorrow on whether to grant Earth provisional membership. Most of the delegates seemed favorable, but Jake knew that even one or two strong objections could derail the entire process. After the session, Jake and his team walked back through the diplomatic quarter. The corridors were less crowded now, as many delegates had returned to their ships for private consultations before the vote. "I think we have a real chance," Amy said quietly. The Zephyrians seemed genuinely interested in trade opportunities. The Vorthons asked good questions about our scientific capabilities. Even some of the smaller delegations are supportive. Jake nodded, but he remained cautious. "The vote isn't until tomorrow. A lot can happen between now and then." They were approaching their quarters when the station's AI announced over the communication system, "Attention, all diplomatic personnel. The council chamber will be closed for maintenance tonight. All delegates are advised to remain in their quarters for security reasons. That's odd, Dr. Park commented. There was no mention of maintenance in the schedule. Jake felt a prickle of unease. In his experience, unexpected changes to security procedures usually meant trouble. "Let's get back to our quarters quickly," he said. But as they approached their section of the diplomatic quarter, Jake noticed that the corridors seemed unusually empty. The normal traffic of diplomatic staff and station personnel was gone. Even the floating AI units that usually provided assistance were nowhere to be seen. "Captain," Sergeant Hayes said quietly, "something doesn't feel right." Jake trusted Hayes's instincts. The sergeant had served in combat zones and knew when a situation was about to turn dangerous. "What are you thinking, Bill?" "Too quiet," Hayes replied. "And look at the lighting. Some of the panels are dimmed. That's not normal for maintenance." Jake looked around more carefully. Hayes was right. The corridor lighting was inconsistent, creating patches of shadow that hadn't been there before. The security cameras that should be monitoring the area were either dark or pointed in different directions. "Change of plan," Jake said quietly. "We're not going back to our quarters yet. Let's take the long way around and see what's happening." Instead of taking the direct route, Jake led his team through a series of maintenance corridors that the station AI had shown them during their orientation tour. These passages were narrower and less well lit, but they provided access to most areas of the diplomatic quarter. As they moved through the maintenance areas, Jake heard voices speaking in the clicking language of the Keltharians. He motioned for his team to stop and listen. Even without understanding the words, the tone was clearly aggressive and urgent. Dr. Park activated her portable translation device and set it to its most sensitive setting. After a moment, fragments of the conversation became clear. "Humans must not be allowed. Council vote tomorrow goes wrong way. Eliminate the threat before..." Jake felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just political opposition. Someone was planning to take direct action against the human delegation. He signaled for his team to retreat quietly, but they had already heard enough. "Captain," Amy whispered, "we need to contact station security immediately." Jake shook his head. If the Keltharians can plan something like this, they either have help from station security or they found a way around it. "We're on our own." They made their way back toward their quarters using a different route, staying in the maintenance corridors as much as possible. Jake's mind was racing, trying to figure out their options. They could try to reach their ship and leave the station, but that would mean abandoning the diplomatic mission. They could attempt to contact Earth for help, but that would take days, or they could prepare for a fight. As they reached the area near their quarters, Jake made his decision. "Amy, get everyone back to my room. Bill, I want you to set up a perimeter watch. Lisa, start packing our essential equipment, but leave room for the weapons case." "Sir," Amy said. "What are you planning?" Jake's expression was grim but determined. "The Keltharians want to solve this problem with violence. They think humans are weak because we don't have energy weapons or advanced military technology. They're about to learn that humans have been fighting wars longer than their species has existed." He paused at the door to their quarters and looked back at his team. "Get ready. Tonight we're going to show the galaxy what humans can do when someone threatens us." The hours passed slowly as Jake and his team prepared for what might come. They had moved all their essential equipment into Jake's room and set up a watch schedule. Sergeant Hayes monitored the corridor through the door's security viewer, while Dr. Park worked on analyzing the station's layout for potential escape routes. Jake sat at his equipment case, carefully checking each weapon. The compound bow was strung and ready, with a quiver of carbon fiber arrows within easy reach. The crossbow pistols were loaded with ceramic-tipped bolts that could punch through most known armor materials. He had arranged throwing knives and other weapons where he could reach them quickly. "Contact," Hayes whispered from his position by the door. 6 figures moving down the corridor. They're trying to stay in the shadows, but I can see them. Jake moved to the door and looked through the viewer. 6 Keltharian soldiers were advancing down the corridor in a tactical formation. They wore dark armor and carried what looked like military-grade energy weapons. These weren't station security guards. This was an assassination squad. "How did they get weapons past security?" Amy asked quietly. "Same way we did," Jake replied grimly. "They found a loophole. Energy weapons might be banned for civilians, but military personnel probably have special exceptions for emergencies." The Keltharians stopped outside the human quarters and took positions. One of them, wearing the insignia of a general, stepped forward and spoke in accented English. "Humans! Come out now! We know you are inside. Your presence threatens galactic peace. The council vote tomorrow will not happen." Jake recognized the voice. It was General Kextar, the same Keltharian who had been hostile during the diplomatic sessions. This confirmed what they had suspected. The military faction was acting on its own, without authorization from the council. "What do you want?" Jake called through the door, buying time to position his team. "Your species is too dangerous to be allowed into galactic civilization," Kextar replied. "You have a history of violence and conquest. We will not allow you to bring that violence to our peaceful galaxy." Jake almost laughed at the irony. The Keltharians were going to murder unarmed diplomats to prevent humans from bringing violence to the galaxy. He signaled to his team and they took their planned positions. "General," Jake called out, "you're making a mistake. We're here on a peaceful diplomatic mission. Attacking us will start the very war you claim to want to prevent." "There will be no war," Kextar replied. "You will simply disappear. A tragic accident. Perhaps a malfunction in your ship's life support systems. These things happen in space." Jake had heard enough. He activated his communication device and spoke clearly into it. "Computer, record everything that happens in this room and transmit it to our ship with automatic Earth relay protocols. If they were going to die here, at least Earth would know what happened and who was responsible. Last chance, humans, General," Kextar called. "Come out peacefully, and your deaths will be quick." Jake looked at his team. Amy had positioned herself behind an overturned table with one of the crossbow pistols. Dr. Park was ready with throwing knives, having proved during their practice sessions that her surgical training gave her excellent aim. Sergeant Hayes had taken position near the door with a compound crossbow. "Well, team," Jake said quietly, "I guess diplomacy is over." The Keltharians must have grown tired of waiting. There was a bright flash, and the door exploded inward in a shower of melted metal and sparks. Energy weapon blasts filled the air, where the humans should have been standing, but Jake's team wasn't where the aliens expected them to be. The first Keltharian soldier through the door walked directly into Sergeant Hayes's crossbow bolt. The ceramic tip punched through the alien's chest armor and sent him crashing to the floor. His energy weapon skittered across the room, useless. The second soldier tried to target Hayes, but Dr. Park's throwing knife caught him in the gap between his helmet and chest armor. The blade found the nerve cluster she had identified in her biological studies, and the soldier dropped instantly. Jake rose from his position behind the furniture and drew his compound bow in one fluid motion. The carbon fiber arrow took the third soldier in the center of his chest, the high-impact tip punching through armor that was designed to stop energy weapons but not primitive projectiles. The remaining 3 soldiers, including General Kextar, fell back into the corridor and began firing through the doorway. Energy blasts lit up the room, but the humans had already moved to new positions. Amy rolled behind the bed and came up with her crossbow pistol ready. Her bolt caught the 4th soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. Jake was already drawing another arrow, his movement smooth and practiced from years of competition shooting. "Impossible!" General Kextar shouted in his own language. "They have no weapons! The security scans showed nothing!" Jake understood enough of the Keltharian language to catch the general's confusion. He smiled grimly as he nocked another arrow. "That's the problem with assuming you know everything, General. You stopped looking for threats you didn't expect to find." The 5th soldier tried to rush the room, counting on his armor to protect him from whatever primitive weapons the humans might have. Jake's arrow met him halfway, followed immediately by one of Dr. Park's perfectly thrown scalpels. The combination dropped him before he could take 3 steps. That left only General Kextar himself. The general backed down the corridor, firing wild shots toward the human quarters. His remaining soldiers were down, and his carefully planned assassination had turned into a disaster. Jake stepped into the doorway, bow drawn and arrow nocked. "General," Jake called out, "I think we need to have a conversation." Kextar's weapon was pointed at Jake, but his hands were shaking. "This is impossible. You are primitives. You have no real weapons." "That's where you're wrong," Jake replied calmly. "We have the best weapons of all. We have human ingenuity and thousands of years of experience in finding creative solutions to problems." He gestured at the fallen soldiers with his bow. "These weapons were old when your species was still learning to make fire, but they work just as well today as they did 5,000 years ago. Maybe better, with modern materials and manufacturing techniques." The general's weapon wavered as he looked at his defeated soldiers. None of them were dead, Jake noticed with professional satisfaction. The humans had aimed to disable, not kill. It was a deliberate choice that he hoped would matter. Later, "You want to know the difference between humans and every other species in this galaxy?" Jake continued. "Everyone else follows the rules exactly as they're written. But humans, we read the rules carefully, and then we find ways to work within them that nobody else would ever think of." Station security finally arrived, attracted by the sound of energy weapons fire. They found General Kextar standing over his unconscious soldiers, while 4 humans with primitive weapons waited calmly for arrest. But when the station AI reviewed the recorded evidence and the applicable laws, the verdict was clear. The humans had violated no regulations regarding prohibited weapons. They had defended themselves against an unprovoked attack by armed intruders. General Kextar, on the other hand, had violated numerous galactic laws regarding the use of military, weapons in neutral space, conspiracy to commit murder, and interference with diplomatic proceedings. As the Keltharian general was led away in restraints, Jake finally lowered his bow. The corridor was a mess of unconscious soldiers and scattered equipment, but his team was alive and unharmed. "Well," Amy said as she checked on the wounded soldiers, "that was educational." Dr. Park was already treating the aliens' injuries with supplies from her medical kit. "Captain, these weapons actually worked better than I expected. The Keltharian anatomy has several vulnerable points that their armor doesn't protect." Jake nodded, but his attention was already turning to what would happen next. The assassination attempt would have serious political consequences. The question, was whether those consequences would help or hurt humanity's chances of joining the galactic community. One way or another, the galaxy was about to learn a lot more about human capabilities than they had expected. News of the incident spread through Nexus Prime faster than light-speed communication. Within hours, every diplomatic delegation on the station knew that the human team had defeated 6 armed Keltharian soldiers using what most species considered primitive hunting tools. Jake sat in the station's main security office, still holding his compound bow. The station commander, a massive being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a tree, had insisted on keeping the weapons as evidence. But Jake had politely pointed out that since no laws had been broken, the weapons should be returned immediately. "Let me understand this correctly," said Security Commander Veltarn, his tentacles shifting nervously. 6 trained Keltharian soldiers, armed with military-grade energy weapons, were defeated by 4 humans using bows and knives? "That's an accurate summary," Jake replied calmly, "though I should point out that these aren't ordinary bows and knives. They represent thousands of years of human weapon development, built using the finest materials and manufacturing techniques available." The station AI had already completed its analysis of the incident. The floating hologram displayed the relevant data as it spoke. After reviewing all available evidence, this unit finds that the human delegation violated no station regulations. All weapons used were specifically excluded from the prohibited items list. The humans acted in clear self-defense against an unprovoked attack. Commander Veltarn's tentacles turned a darker shade of purple, which Jake had learned indicated frustration. "But how did you know to bring these specific weapons? Did you anticipate this attack?" "Not specifically," Jake answered. "But human history has taught us that diplomatic missions can become dangerous very quickly. We prepared for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that someone might not want these negotiations to succeed." Dr. Park, who had been treating the wounded Keltharian soldiers, returned to the security office. "Commander, all the injured soldiers are stable. Their wounds were precisely placed to disable without causing permanent damage. This level of accuracy suggests extensive training with these weapons." Jake nodded. "We don't believe in killing when wounding will accomplish the same goal. Those soldiers were following orders, even if those orders were illegal. They didn't deserve to die for their general's mistakes." The security commander's tentacles shifted to a lighter color, indicating what Jake hoped was approval. Throughout galactic civilization, precision and restraint in combat were considered signs of advanced tactical thinking. "The Keltharian High Command has been notified of General Kextar's actions," the AI announced. "They have formally disavowed his attack and requested permission to take custody of their personnel for military justice proceedings." "What about the diplomatic sessions?" Amy asked. "Are they still scheduled for tomorrow?" Commander Veltarn consulted his communication device. "The Galactic Council has decided to proceed with the vote as planned. However, there has been a significant change in the political situation. Several delegations have formally requested private meetings with the human team." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What kind of meetings?" "The Zephyrian Trade Consortium wants to discuss expanded commercial partnerships. The Vorthon Science Council is interested in your tactical innovations. And surprisingly, the Keltharian civilian government wants to meet to discuss how to prevent future incidents like this one." "The Keltharians want to meet with us?" Amy sounded surprised. "After their military just tried to kill us?" The station AI provided context. "The Keltharian species has a complex political structure. The military faction led by General Kextar represents only a small percentage of their population. The civilian government has been seeking ways to reduce military influence for several years. Tonight's incident has given them the justification they needed. Jake considered this information carefully. Human intelligence about Keltharian politics was limited, but this development could be very significant. If the civilian government could use this incident to reduce military power, it might actually improve relations between humans and Keltharians in the long term. "Commander," Jake said, "we'll accept all the meeting requests, but I want additional security guarantees. What happened tonight cannot happen again." "Agreed," Veltarn replied. "Station security protocols have been updated. All military personnel from any species are now required to surrender their weapons upon entering the diplomatic quarter. No exceptions." The security meeting ended with Jake's team being formally cleared of any wrongdoing. They were free to continue their diplomatic mission, and their weapons were returned. But as they walked back to their quarters, Jake noticed that other beings in the corridors looked at them differently now. Some stared with obvious curiosity. Others moved aside to give the humans more space. A few seemed to be studying the weapons Jake carried, as if trying to understand how such simple-looking devices could be so effective. "Captain," Dr. Park said quietly, "I think we may have changed how the galaxy sees humanity." Jake nodded. "The question is whether that change will help us or hurt us." Their first private meeting was with the Zephyrian Trade Consortium the next morning. The Zephyrians were crystalline beings who communicated partly through light patterns in their translucent bodies. Their representative, a being called Resonance of Distant Stars, was nearly 7 feet tall and sparkled like a living gemstone. "The events of last night have been most illuminating," Resonance said, his body flickering with blue and green patterns. "We had assumed that humans were a technologically primitive species. We were incorrect." Jake smiled. "Our technology may be different from yours, but that doesn't make it primitive. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most reliable ones." "Indeed," the Zephyrian agreed. "Our analysis suggests that human tactical thinking follows patterns we have not encountered before. You do not approach problems the way other species do." Amy leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Most galactic species follow logical, predictable development paths. When they encounter a barrier, they develop technology to overcome it. When they face a superior force, they retreat or seek diplomatic solutions. But humans appear to improvise." Resonance's body patterns shifted to yellow and orange, indicating excitement. "You were forbidden to bring firearms, so you brought weapons that predate firearms by thousands of years. You faced superior numbers and technology, so you used superior tactics and precision. This kind of adaptive thinking is valuable in trade negotiations." The meeting with the Zephyrians went very well. They were interested in establishing trade routes with Earth and wanted to learn more about human manufacturing techniques. They seemed particularly fascinated by the concept of using ancient knowledge with modern materials. The meeting with the Vorthan Science Council was even more interesting. The Vorthans were tall, thin beings with skin that changed color based on their emotions. Their representative, Science Director Mordan, immediately wanted to examine Jake's weapons. "These projectile systems are remarkably efficient," Mordan said, his skin shifting to a deep blue that indicated scientific fascination. "The energy transfer ratios are excellent, and the accuracy potential is extraordinary. But what interests us most is the tactical philosophy behind them." "How so?" Jake asked. "Every species in the galaxy has moved beyond physical projectile weapons," Mordan explained. "We use energy weapons because they are more powerful and technologically advanced. But your weapons have advantages that energy weapons do not. Dr. Park nodded. They're silent. They don't require power sources, and they're almost impossible to detect with standard scanning equipment. Precisely, the Vorthon agreed. But more importantly, they represent a different way of thinking about problems. You did not try to match your opponent's technology. Instead, you chose tools that made their technology irrelevant. The Vorthon Science Council wanted to establish a research partnership with Earth. They were interested in human problem-solving methods and wanted to study what they called adaptive tactical thinking. But the most surprising meeting was with the Keltharian civilian government. Civilian Administrator Gentalar was very different from the military Keltharians Jake had encountered. She was smaller, with brighter coloring, and her manner was apologetic rather than aggressive. On behalf of the Keltharian people, I offer our deepest apologies for General Kextar's actions, she said through her translation device. His attack was unauthorized and violates every principle of diplomatic conduct. Jake inclined his head respectfully. We understand that the general was acting without government approval. We hold no ill will toward the Keltharian people. Your restraint is appreciated, Gentalar replied. Our military analysts have reviewed the incident recordings. They are impressed by your tactical skills and your decision to disable rather than kill our soldiers. This demonstrates the kind of measured response that civilized species should show. She paused, her mandibles clicking softly. If I may ask, how did you learn to fight so effectively with such traditional weapons? Jake smiled. Humans have been practicing warfare for our entire history. We've learned that the best weapon is not always the most advanced one. Sometimes, it's the one your enemy doesn't expect. The Keltharian administrator's compound eyes reflected the light as the Galactic Council chamber was packed for the vote on human membership. Representatives from over 40 species filled the circular arrangement of seats, while observers watched from galleries above. Jake had never seen so many different forms of intelligent life in one place. The atmosphere was electric with tension and curiosity. Word of the previous night's incident had spread throughout the station, and everyone wanted to see how the council would respond to humanity's request for membership. Jake sat at the Earth delegation table, wearing his dress uniform but keeping his compound bow within easy reach. After the assassination attempt, he had decided that appearing completely unarmed might invite more trouble. The bow served as both a practical weapon and a symbol of human resourcefulness. Council moderator. Driftshell floated in the center of the chamber, her jellyfish-like form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The Council will now hear final statements before voting on the application of the species known as humans for provisional membership in the galactic community. The chair recognizes the Keltharian delegation, Driftshell announced. Jake tensed, expecting another hostile speech from the military faction. But the being who stood was Civilian Administrator Gentalar, not General Kextar. Her translation device activated as she began to speak. Honored council members, the Keltharian civilian government wishes to formally apologize for the unauthorized actions of certain military personnel. General Kextar has been arrested and will face full military justice for his crimes against diplomatic protocol. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. It was unusual for one species to publicly discipline their own representatives during council proceedings. Gentalar continued. After careful review of the incident and extensive consultation with our people, the Keltharian civilian government votes in favor of human membership. The humans demonstrated exactly the kind of restraint and tactical wisdom that we value in civilized species. Jake felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. This was completely unexpected. The species that had tried to assassinate them was now supporting their membership. The humans faced a deadly attack with superior numbers and technology, Gentaler said. They responded with precision, efficiency, and remarkable restraint. They could have killed our soldiers, but chose to disable them instead. This shows the kind of measured judgment that the galaxy needs. The Zephyrian trade representative rose next. Resonance of distant stars sparkled with blue and gold patterns as he spoke. The Zephyrian Trade Consortium strongly supports human membership. Our preliminary negotiations indicate that humans possess unique problem-solving abilities that would benefit all galactic commerce. Their adaptive thinking and creative approaches to challenges represent exactly the kind of innovation our trade networks need. The Vorthan Science Director was equally supportive. The Vorthan Science Council enthusiastically endorses human membership. Their tactical methodologies demonstrate cognitive patterns we have not encountered in any other species. The humans approach problems from unexpected angles and find solutions that others would not consider. This cognitive diversity would strengthen our entire civilization. One by one, the various delegations cast their votes. The smaller species were generally supportive, seeing humans as potential allies who might help balance the power of the larger galactic civilizations. Several mentioned humanity's demonstrated willingness to defend themselves while showing restraint toward defeated enemies. The only opposition came from a few species that Jake's briefings had identified as particularly conservative. They expressed concern about admitting a species with such a violent history to galactic civilization. But even these objections were mild compared to what Jake had expected. When the voting was complete, Moderator Driftshell pulsed with bright, yellow patterns as she announced the results. By a vote of 37 in favor, 4 opposed, and 2 abstentions, the Galactic Council grants provisional membership to the human species of the planet Earth. The chamber erupted in sounds that Jake's translation device couldn't begin to interpret. Some were clearly congratulations, others sounded like conversations about the implications of the vote. Jake stood and bowed to the council, following the protocol he had learned. On behalf of all humanity, I thank the Galactic Council for this honor, he said. Earth looks forward to contributing to galactic peace and prosperity. But the real surprise came during the formal reception afterward. Jake found himself surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, all wanting to learn more about human capabilities and methods. Captain Sullivan, said a delegate from the Aquatic Collective, speaking through a water-filled communication device, we understand that humans have extensive experience with underwater operations. Our species would be very interested in tactical consultation agreements. A representative from the Silicon-based mining consortium wanted to discuss human engineering techniques. Your species has a reputation for building things that work in impossible conditions. We have several projects that require this kind of creative engineering. Even more interesting were the requests from species that Jake had never heard of. Apparently, word of human tactical capabilities had spread far beyond the official council membership. Several non-aligned species wanted to establish defensive partnerships with Earth. Dr. Park pulled Jake aside during a quiet moment in the reception. Captain, I've been listening to the conversations around the room. I think we may have started something bigger than just diplomatic membership. What do you mean? Jake asked. Several species are talking about the human paradigm, she explained. They're fascinated by our approach to problem solving. Some of them want to send observers to Earth to study our methods. Others are talking about hiring human consultants for their own challenges. Amy Carter joined the conversation, carrying a plate of alien foods that she was experimentally tasting. Sir, the Keltharian administrator wants to set up a formal exchange program. They want to send their young warriors to Earth to learn what she called adaptive combat philosophy. Jake considered this development. What exactly did she mean by that? Near as I can tell, Amy replied, they want their people to learn how to think like humans, how to look at a problem and find solutions that nobody else would consider. Sergeant Hayes appeared at Jake's elbow, moving with his usual quiet efficiency. Captain, you might want to hear this. I was talking to some of the station security personnel. They're saying that weapon regulations throughout the galaxy are being reviewed because of what happened here. How? So? Jake asked. Well, sir, it turns out that most species have similar weapon definitions to what we encountered. They focus on energy weapons and modern projectile systems. But nobody thought to regulate primitive weapons because nobody considered them a threat. Hayes smiled slightly. Apparently, several governments are scrambling to update their laws. They're calling it the human loophole. Jake had to laugh at that. So we've managed to change galactic weapon regulations just by reading them carefully? That's about the size of it, sir, Hayes confirmed. But it gets better. Some species are actually removing those restrictions instead of expanding them. They figure that if humans can be effective with primitive weapons, maybe their own people should learn to use them too. The reception continued for several hours, with Jake's team fielding questions and requests from dozens of different species. By the end of the evening, they had preliminary agreements for trade partnerships, research exchanges, tactical consultations, and even cultural programs. As they finally returned to their quarters, Jake reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. They had come to Nexus Prime hoping to gain simple membership in the galactic community. Instead, they had established Earth as a significant player in galactic affairs and created demand for human expertise throughout known space. Captain, Dr. Park said as they gathered in Jake's room for a final debrief, I think we may have accidentally started a revolution. What kind of revolution? Jake asked. A thinking revolution, she replied. For thousands of years, galactic civilization has followed the same patterns. Everyone develops the same technologies, follows the same diplomatic protocols, uses the same tactical approaches. But humans do things differently. Amy nodded in agreement. They've never encountered a species that looks at their rules and finds creative ways to work within them. Most species either follow the rules exactly or break them completely. We found a third option. Jake looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. You know what the funny thing is? We didn't do anything special. We just approached their problems the way humans have always approached problems. We read the rules, figured out what we could do within those rules, and then found the most effective way to do it. But that's exactly what makes us special, Dr. Park said. Every other species in the galaxy thinks inside the same box. They never question whether the box is the right shape or size. Humans don't just think outside the box. We redesign the box to fit what we need to accomplish. As Jake prepared his final report for Earth, he realized that this diplomatic mission had accomplished far more than anyone had hoped. Humanity wasn't just joining galactic civilization, they were changing it. 6 months after the historic vote at Nexus Prime, Jake found himself back at the massive space station. But this time, everything was different. Where once he had been an unknown representative of a species requesting membership, he was now Ambassador Jake Sullivan, humanity's official representative to the Galactic Council. The changes were visible everywhere. The corridor leading to the diplomatic quarter had new signs in dozens of languages, including English. Human-style furniture had been added to many of the common areas, and most noticeably, the security checkpoint now featured a weapons regulation list that covered 3 full pages. "Ambassador Sullivan, welcome back to Nexus Prime," said Guard Commander Zektal, the same Keltharian who had questioned Jake about weapon definitions 6 months earlier. But his tone was completely different now. Instead of suspicion, there was something that almost sounded like respect. "Thank you, Commander," Jake replied. "I trust everything has been quiet since my last visit?" The guard's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was Keltharian amusement. "Quiet, yes, but very interesting. Your species has had quite an impact on galactic affairs." As Jake and his expanded team walked through the station, the evidence of that impact was everywhere. In one corridor, they passed a group of young Vorthon scientists practicing with Earth-made compound bows under the instruction of a human advisor. In another area, Zephyrian trade negotiators were studying human historical texts about economic strategy. "Sir," said Lieutenant Carter, who had been promoted and now served as Jake's chief of security, "have you seen the latest intelligence reports about galactic weapon modifications?" Jake nodded. "Some of it. Remind me of the highlights." "Well, the Aquatic Collective has started equipping their ships with projectile weapons that work underwater. The Silicon Mining Consortium is using human-designed kinetic tools for asteroid operations, and at least 6 different species have established traditional archery programs in their military training." Dr. Park, now serving as cultural liaison, added her own observations. "It's not just military applications. Human problem-solving methods are being taught in universities across the galaxy. They're calling it adaptive analysis or creative solution architecture. Some species are completely restructuring their educational systems." They arrived at the Human Embassy Suite, a set of rooms that had been specially designed for Earth's growing diplomatic presence. The main conference room had a large window showing the stars, and the walls were decorated with examples of human art and culture. Jake's first meeting was with a delegation he never would have expected 6 months ago. Representatives from 5 different species had come specifically to request human consultation on their internal problems. "Ambassador," said Science Director Mordan of the Vorthon Science Council, "we have a situation that requires human analytical methods. Our standard approaches have not been successful." "What kind of situation?" Jake asked. A new voice answered. It belonged to Fleet Commander Axtel of the Rigelian Defense Force, a species that looked like armored bears with multiple arms. "We have a strategic problem that threatens 3 star systems. Pirates using stolen military technology are attacking civilian ships. Our conventional tactics cannot stop them." Jake raised an eyebrow. This was definitely not a typical diplomatic issue. "Why do you think human methods would be more effective?" "Because the pirates are using our own tactics against us," explained Trade Minister Resonance of Distant Stars from the Zephyrian Consortium. "They know our standard responses and plan around them. We need someone who thinks differently." Dr. Park leaned forward with interest. "How exactly are they doing this?" Commander Axtel activated a holographic display showing star charts and ship movements. "The pirates capture our vessels and study our tactical databases. Then they use that information to predict our responses to their attacks. When we send patrol ships, they know exactly where we will go and how we will behave." Jake studied the display thoughtfully. This was exactly the kind of problem that human military history was full of. "Have you considered changing your tactical patterns?" "We have tried," Mordan replied. "But our military doctrines are based on thousands of years of development. Our officers are trained in specific ways. Changing our entire approach would take decades. But you don't need to change your entire approach, Jake said with a slight smile. You just need to add some unpredictability to it. He stood and walked to the display, highlighting several key points. The pirates are counting on you to follow standard patterns. So give them the patterns they expect, but add elements they won't predict. What do you mean? Asked Commander Axtell. Let me tell you about something called guerrilla warfare, Jake began. It's a human military concept based on doing the unexpected. Over the next 2 hours, Jake outlined a strategy that combined traditional galactic fleet movements with human tactical innovations. The idea was to maintain the standard approach that alien officers were trained for, but to add unpredictable elements at critical moments. Instead of sending your patrol fleets along the routes the pirates expect, send them along normal routes, but equip them with human-style projectile weapons as backup systems. When the pirates disable your energy weapons with their countermeasures, switch to weapons they've never encountered before. Projectile weapons on spaceships. Commander Axtell's translator conveyed his skepticism. Not ordinary projectiles, Jake clarified. Magnetically accelerated tungsten rods, silent, invisible to most sensors, and devastating at close range. The pirates won't know what hit them until it's too late, Dr. Park added her own expertise. We could also provide training in what humans call asymmetric thinking, teaching your officers to look for solutions that aren't in their standard manuals. The meeting continued for most of the day, with Jake's team working out the details of a comprehensive anti-piracy strategy. By the end, the alien representatives were excited about possibilities they had never considered. This approach could revolutionize fleet operations throughout the galaxy, Science Director Mordan said, his skin shifting to the deep blue of scientific fascination. But Jake's most interesting meeting came later that evening. Civilian Administrator Jen Toller of the Keltharian government requested a private consultation about what she called internal political restructuring. Ambassador, she said as they sat in Jake's private office, my people have a problem that we believe requires human insight. I'm listening, Jake replied. For centuries, our military faction has dominated Keltharian politics by claiming that only they can protect our people from external threats. But the incident 6 months ago proved that their methods are not always the most effective. Jake nodded. This was delicate political territory, but he could see where the conversation was heading. Our civilian government wants to reduce military influence. But we don't know how to do it without appearing weak or inviting real threats, Jen Toller continued. How do humans balance military power with civilian authority? Jake smiled. This was exactly the kind of complex political problem that human history was full of. The key is to make the military accountable to civilian leadership while still allowing them to do their job effectively. He spent the next hour explaining concepts like civilian oversight, military professionalism, and democratic control of armed forces. Jen Toller listened intently, occasionally asking questions about specific implementation details. The most important thing, Jake concluded, is to make it clear that the military serves the people, not the other way around. Their job is to protect civilization, not to control it. But how do we implement such changes without causing a military revolt? Jen Toller asked. Gradually and with clear benefits for everyone involved, Jake replied. Show the military that civilian oversight makes them more effective, not less. Give them better equipment, better training, and more respect in exchange for accepting democratic control. As the meeting ended, Jake realized that humanity's influence on galactic affairs was expanding far beyond military tactics and trade negotiations. They were becoming consultants for political reform, social change, and cultural development. The next morning brought news that confirmed Jake's growing understanding of humanity's new role. Dr. Park burst into his office with a data pad full of communication intercepts. "Jake, you need to see this," she said excitedly. "Intelligence reports from across the galaxy. At least 12 different species are implementing what they're calling human solution protocols for various problems." Jake scanned the reports. The Aquatic Collective was using human-inspired techniques to solve territorial disputes. The Crystal Federation was applying human negotiation methods to trade conflicts. Even the mysterious gas giant entities were reportedly studying human communications for insights into interspecies relations. "There's more," Dr. Park continued. 3 different species have established permanent exchange programs with Earth. They want to send their best students to human universities to learn our problem-solving methods. Jake set down the data pad and walked to his window overlooking the station's central hub. Ships from dozens of worlds moved past in orderly patterns, but now many of them carried human advisors or used human-designed modifications. "You know what's really amazing about all this?" he said to Dr. Park. Administrator Gentaler, that's an excellent question, and it goes to the heart of what human involvement in galactic affairs should look like going forward. He paused to organize his thoughts, then continued. "Humans don't want to be the galaxy's permanent problem solvers. Our goal has always been to help other species develop their own adaptive thinking capabilities." Jake activated a new display showing educational and training programs that had been established across the galaxy. "Over the past 2 years, we've trained over 50,000 individuals from various species in human analytical methods. These people are now training others in their own cultures, adapting our approaches to fit their unique perspectives and needs. The ultimate goal," Dr. Park added from the gallery, "is for every species to develop their own version of creative problem-solving. Humans can provide the initial framework, but each culture will find its own ways to implement adaptive thinking." Council. Moderator Driftshell pulsed with patterns that Jake had learned indicated deep consideration. "Ambassador Sullivan, what do you foresee as the long-term relationship between humanity and galactic civilization?" Jake smiled. This was the question he had been hoping someone would ask. "Moderator, I believe we're entering an era of true collaborative civilization. For thousands of years, galactic culture has been stable but somewhat stagnant. Each species developed along predictable paths, and interactions between species followed established patterns." He gestured toward the assembled representatives. "But now, every species in this chamber is thinking differently about their challenges and opportunities. You're not just solving problems more effectively, you're discovering possibilities that you never knew existed." "And humans?" asked Fleet Commander Axtel of the Rigelian Defense Force. "What is our role in this new era?" "Humans will continue to do what we've always done," Jake replied. "We'll face new challenges, find creative solutions, and share what we learn with our friends and allies. But we won't be the only ones doing this anymore." He looked around the chamber at representatives from dozens of worlds. "Every species here has unique perspectives and capabilities that humans can learn from. The future of galactic civilization isn't about human leadership or human solutions. It's about all of us working together to find answers that none of us could disk." 2 years had passed since Jake Sullivan first asked a Keltharian guard to define the word firearm. Now, as he walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime for what might be his final official visit, He could barely recognize the place. The changes were everywhere and impossible to ignore. Human-designed efficiency improvements had been installed throughout the station. The old rigid corridor patterns had been supplemented with flexible routing systems that adapted to traffic flow. Emergency equipment now included both advanced alien technology and simple human backup systems that worked when the complex systems failed. But the most obvious change was the people. Beings from dozens of species moved through the station with a confidence and creativity that hadn't existed before. Jake could see it in the way they walked, the way they talked to each other, and especially in the way they approached problems. "Ambassador Sullivan?" called a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Guard Commander Zektal approaching, but the Keltharian was no longer in security uniform. Instead, he wore the insignia of a diplomatic attaché. "Commander," Jake replied, then caught himself. "Sorry, I should say Attaché Zektal now, shouldn't I?" The Keltharian's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Indeed. I completed the human-advised diplomatic training program last year. I now serve as liaison between station security and the various diplomatic delegations." Jake smiled. "And how do you find the work?" "Much more interesting than checking identification documents," Zektal replied. "The human approach to conflict resolution has proven very effective. We have reduced diplomatic incidents by 60% using negotiation techniques learned from Earth." As they talked, Jake noticed a group of young beings from various species practicing with what looked like modified compound bows in a nearby recreation area. But these weren't quite the same as the weapons he had brought 2 years ago. "Attaché, what are those young people doing?" Jake asked. Zektal's compound eyes followed Jake's gaze. "Ah, that is the new Galactic Youth Development Program. It combines physical training with problem-solving exercises. The participants learn to build and use projectile weapons while studying human tactical philosophy. And their governments approve of this?" Jake asked, somewhat surprised. "More than approve," Zektal replied. "Most species now consider human-style adaptive thinking to be an essential skill for their young people. The program has a waiting list of over 10,000 applicants from 43 different worlds." Jake's final official meeting was with the full Galactic Council, but not for the reasons he had expected. Instead of discussing trade agreements or military cooperation, he was here to address what Council Moderator Driftshell called the human question. The council chamber was packed, but the atmosphere was very different from Jake's first appearance. Instead of curiosity and suspicion, there was an energy of excitement and anticipation. Representatives leaned forward in their seats, and the translator network hummed with dozens of active conversations. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Sullivan of Earth," Moderator Driftshell announced. Jake stood, but instead of walking to the central speaking platform, he remained at the Earth delegation table. It was a small gesture, but one that emphasized equality rather than supplication. "Honored council members," he began. 2 years ago, I stood in this chamber asking for humanity's admission to galactic civilization. Today, I'm here to discuss how that membership has changed all of us." The chamber fell silent. This wasn't the formal diplomatic language that usually characterized council sessions. "When my team first arrived at this station, we were asked to comply with regulations that prohibited firearms. We did exactly what we were asked to do. We followed the rules precisely. But we also brought weapons that nobody had thought to regulate because nobody considered them threatening." Jake paused and gestured toward the viewing gallery where his original team sat. Dr. Park, now Director of Interspecies Relations, waved slightly. Lieutenant Carter, promoted to Security Chief for all human diplomatic missions, nodded respectfully. Even Sergeant Hayes was there, now a senior technical advisor to 3 different alien governments. What we didn't realize at the time, Jake continued, was that we weren't just bringing different weapons. We were bringing a different way of thinking about problems. He activated a holographic display showing data from across the galaxy. In the past 2 years, species throughout the galactic community have adopted what you call human-style problem-solving. The results speak for themselves. The display showed impressive statistics. Trade disputes had decreased by 40%. Military conflicts were being resolved faster and with fewer casualties. Scientific collaboration had increased dramatically. Even crime rates had dropped on most worlds. But the most important change isn't in these numbers, Jake said. It's in how you think about challenges. 2 years ago, when faced with a problem, most species would either apply standard solutions or develop new technology to overcome the obstacle. The chamber remained completely quiet as Jake continued. Now, species throughout the galaxy are asking different questions. Instead of, how do we overcome this obstacle? They're asking, how do we work around it? Instead of, what technology do we need? They're asking, what resources do we already have that we might be using differently? Representative after representative nodded in agreement. Jake could see recognition in their expressions. Humans didn't invent creative thinking, Jake said. Every species in this chamber has the capacity for innovation and adaptation. We just approached problems from directions that galactic civilization hadn't explored in thousands of years. Science Director Morden of the Vorthan Council stood to speak. Ambassador Sullivan, your assessment is correct. But there is something more significant happening. Human influence has not just changed how we solve problems. It has changed how we understand what is possible. The Vorthan's skin shifted to the deep blue of scientific excitement. Before human contact, our species had accepted that certain challenges were simply unsolvable. We had tried every approach we could imagine, and when those failed, we concluded that solutions did not exist. But humans showed us that our imagination was limited by our assumptions, added Trade Minister Resonance of Distant Stars. When you cannot bring firearms, you bring weapons that predate firearms. When you cannot match superior technology, you use tactics that make technology irrelevant. This is not just problem solving. This is paradigm transformation. Civilian Administrator Gentaler of the Keltharian government requested permission to speak. Ambassador Sullivan, I have a question that I believe represents the concerns of many council members. Please proceed, Jake replied. Human influence on galactic civilization has been profound and largely positive. But some of our people wonder whether this dependence on human consultation is healthy for our long-term development. Are we becoming too reliant on Earth for solutions to our problems? Jake had been expecting this question. It was a valid concern, and one that he had discussed extensively with his team and with Earth's leadership.